The world didn't end with fire or thunder. It ended with a ringing phone and a voice that cracked her soul in half. Emma had been sitting on the living room floor, half-finished sketch in her lap, when the call came. She didn't remember standing. She didn't remember speaking. She only remembered running, barefoot, into the storm outside, the rain swallowing her screams before anyone could hear them. The hospital smelled like metal and cold fear. The hallways were too bright, the air too still, the doctors' faces too soft for the words they carried. Her mother's hand was no longer warm. Her father's laugh was no longer anywhere in the world. She touched their skin and something inside her shattered so violently she couldn't breathe for minutes. People held her. People spoke to her. People tried to comfort her. None of it mattered. She buried them under a sky that felt too blue for such cruelty. Umbrellas dotted the cemetery like quiet ghosts, faces blurred by tears and rain. Emma heard condolences but couldn't feel them. She stood between two graves as if she had been abandoned at the edge of the earth. When the last handful of dirt fell, she felt the world stop making sense. The lawyer spoke next. Papers, debt, auctions, signatures, terms. She barely processed any of it until he said, "Your next of kin has agreed to take you." Agreed, as if she were a burden being passed along, an item being checked off a list. Her Aunt Helen and Uncle Walter lived in a house that looked beautiful from the outside, tall iron gates, clean white walls, manicured hedges. But the moment she walked in, she felt the air shift. Everything smelled like polish and coldness. Emma moved through the rooms like a shadow, her presence brushing against surfaces that seemed to reject her. Helen's smile was tight. Walter's gaze was indifferent. There were rules, expectations, chores, quiet. Emma obeyed because she didn't have the strength to do anything else. She folded into herself the way someone folds a fragile letter they never intend to open again. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't ask questions. She didn't cry where anyone could see. She became the kind of invisible that only grief can carve out of a person. Nights were the worst. Silence turned into something living. It pressed against her ribs, crawled into her sheets, curled into her ears until she wanted to scream. She held the last photograph she had of her parents, the edges soft from years of touching. She whispered to them in the dark, even though she knew no one would answer. One night, long after the house had fallen quiet, she slipped out of her room in search of air. She moved softly down the hall, her footsteps swallowed by the thick carpets. That was when she heard it, two voices behind the door of Walter's study, low and urgent. "Hail Syndicate, we don't have time, Helen." Emma froze, her skin prickled. "They want the debt cleared before the end of the month." Helen's voice was sharp. "We don't have that kind of money." "She's the solution," Walter hissed. He agreed, they all agreed, this erases everything. Emma's breath caught in her throat. Helen whispered, "Do you really think?" "She has no one, no future, no power, and she won't fight, it's perfect." Emma's chest tightened. "But Richard Hale," Helen sounded unsure, afraid. "He's ruthless." "He wants her," Walter replied. "That's all that matters. Once she's his, the debt is gone. Our lives go back to normal." Emma stumbled back, heart hammering, her body shaking so violently she almost collapsed. She didn't know the Hale Syndicate, but she knew the name. Everyone did. It belonged to a world dripping with shadows. Crime, blood, power, whispers that made even the bravest men lock their doors at night. And Richard Hale. A nightmare dressed in an expensive suit. She pressed a hand over her mouth to stop the sob that wanted to escape. She ran back to her room, shut the door, and slid down against it, trembling so hard her teeth hurt. They were selling her. Trading her life for a debt she had nothing to do with. 19 years old, grieving alone. And now promised to a man whose name carried fear like a blade. In that moment, Emma understood something with brutal clarity. Losing her parents wasn't the end of her world. It was only the beginning of the storm that was coming for her. Emma barely slept, if sleep could even reach a body that trembled the way hers did. Morning came like a punishment, too bright and too loud, peeling back everything she had tried to hide in the darkness. Her eyes burned, her throat ached from silent crying, and her hands wouldn't stop shaking as she changed into the clothes Helen left outside her door. She felt hollow, like someone had scooped out her insides and left an echo behind. When she walked downstairs, Helen was already seated at the dining table, sipping tea with the same expression she wore at funerals, distant and cold. Walter sat across from her, scrolling through his phone. Neither looked up when Emma entered, not until she reached for a chair. "Sit," Walter ordered, not a greeting but a command. Emma sat. She kept her gaze on her lap, afraid her trembling might betray her. "We have news," Helen said in an airy voice that didn't match the poison behind it. "Mr. Hale has agreed to meet you today." Emma's stomach dropped. Today, no warning, no chance to run, no chance to breathe. Her voice cracked when she spoke. "I don't want this." Helen's eyes hardened, her voice slicing through the room. "Wanting has nothing to do with it. You are doing what is necessary, Emma. You owe us." Emma looked up then, tears burning her lashes. "Owe you? I never asked to." Walter slammed his hand on the table. The sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. "Enough. You live under this roof. Because we allow it, you eat. Because we provide it, you have debts tied to your name. Because your parents couldn't handle their own responsibilities." Her chest constricted. He blamed them. He blamed her. Walter continued, voice cold. "Mr. Hale is offering salvation. You will not embarrass us, Emma. You will go. You will smile. You will be quiet." And what happens after her voice was barely a whisper. Helen leaned forward with a chilling calm. "After you sign the papers, and the marriage is final, your life will no longer be our concern." Emma felt her breath falter as the truth settled in. She wasn't family, she wasn't loved, she wasn't even a responsibility, she was currency. The drive to the meeting felt unreal. The car moved through the city like a silent shadow, while Emma sat pressed against the door, her heart pounding so loudly. She thought the driver could hear it. Every traffic light, every turn, every bump in the road tightened the fear wrapped around her like chains. They arrived at a building that didn't belong in her world, a towering hotel of black stone and glass, guarded by men in suits who didn't smile and didn't blink. The air itself felt sharper here, heavier. Walter walked ahead without looking back. Helen gripped Emma's arm so tightly she left marks as she dragged her through polished doors into a private lounge with gold lighting and dark leather seats. The air smelled of expensive cologne and something colder. Then the room shifted. He entered. Richard Hale stepped inside with a presence that made the air buckle. His tall frame filled the doorway, his suit sharp, his hair a mix of dark and silver that made him look carved from something ancient. His eyes, though those were worse than everything she had seen. Pictures, but pictures couldn't capture the stillness, the control, the weight of a man who commanded the darkest corners of the world. His gaze moved through the room like a silent blade before it landed on her, held her, and for a moment Emma forgot how to breathe. Walter rushed forward. "Mr. Hale, thank you for meeting us." Richard didn't look at Walter. He kept his eyes on Emma, studying her with a focus that felt too intense, too knowing. "You must be Emma," he said, his voice deep, steady, unreadable. Emma nodded, but her voice failed her. Richard stepped closer, his steps slow, almost deliberate. His presence was overwhelming. But not loud. He didn't push, he didn't rush, he simply existed in a way that made everyone else fade. Walter cleared his throat. "We believe she will be a perfect match, and considering the circumstances." Richard finally turned toward him. "Circumstances?" Walter swallowed. "I meant the arrangement." Richard's jaw tightened, slightly, then he looked back at Emma. "You look afraid." Emma wasn't expecting honesty. She wasn't expecting gentleness. She nodded anyway. "Good," he said quietly. "It means you can see the world for what it is." The world held its breath. Then Richard said something that made Helen stiffen and made Emma's pulse roar in her ears. "No one touches what is mine." Emma didn't know if it was a promise or a warning. She only knew her life had already begun to slip from her hands, and the man standing before her now held every piece of what came next. Emma felt the room closing in on her, as if the walls were shifting closer each time Richard's eyes touched her. Walter kept speaking, throwing out numbers and promises, trying to impress a man who clearly did not care about him at all. Richard didn't look away from Emma even once. His silence felt heavier than any threat. It was the kind of silence that decided fates. When Richard finally spoke again, his voice cut through the air like a blade. "I want a moment alone with her." Walter froze. Helen's lips parted in protest, but one look from Richard ended any argument before it could begin. They stepped out quickly, fear disguised as obedience. The door clicked shut, leaving Emma alone with the man who now controlled her future. Richard moved closer, but not too close. He walked like someone who didn't need force to command a room. His presence alone was enough. He stopped in front of her, his expression unreadable. "You think you know why you are here," he said softly. Emma looked down, afraid to meet his eyes. "I was told you want this marriage." "I do not want a wife," he replied before she could finish. "I want order, I want payment, and I want peace, and unfortunately you are tangled in all three." Emma's breath shook. She expected cruelty, anger, ownership. But what she found was something stranger. He wasn't trying to frighten her. He was stating a truth she could not escape. "Look at me," he said quietly. Emma lifted her eyes. Slowly, Richard studied her face with a seriousness that made her heart beat violent. "You have no idea what my world requires." He stepped closer. And for a moment, she thought he might touch her, but he just watched her as if measuring the weight of her fear. "Tell me, Emma," he asked. "How much did they tell you about me?" Her voice barely carried. "They said you erase debts." His jaw tightened. "Did they tell you the cost?" She swallowed. "No." Richard leaned in slightly, and for the first time Emma felt the danger beneath his calm. "The Hale Syndicate does not take brides," he murmured. "We take oaths, we take loyalty, we take silence." Her pulse thundered. "What do you take from me then?" His answer was too quiet, too sharp. "Everything you are willing to give, and nothing you are not." She didn't understand. It didn't make sense. Why would a man like him offer choice when her own family never had? Before she could speak, the door opened. Walter returned, his smile trembling. "So is everything settled?" Richard didn't look at him. He kept his eyes on Emma when he answered. "She will be mine by the end of the week." Emma felt the floor tilt beneath her, and she realized this was not a warning. This was a countdown to life. She could no longer escape. The week passed like a blur she couldn't outrun. Every sunrise felt like a countdown. Every sunset felt like something tightening around her chest. Her aunt and uncle moved through the house with a strange mix of fear and excitement, whispering behind closed doors, packing her things without asking what she wanted or what she felt. Emma watched everything happen around her like someone trapped behind glass, unable to stop the world from dragging her into something darker than she had ever imagined. The morning of the wedding arrived far too quickly. The dress Helen chose wasn't white, but a pale silver shimmering like moonlight. It felt cold against Emma's skin, cold like the life she was being pushed into. She stood in front of the mirror staring at the girl, reflected back a girl who didn't look like a bride, a girl who didn't look ready, a girl who looked like she was about to disappear. A black car arrived at the gate, guarded by two silent men, dressed in tailored suits. Their faces were unreadable, their posture stiff. As blades, one of them opened the door for her. With a small nod, Emma stepped inside, her heart pounding so loudly she felt it in her throat. The wedding venue wasn't a hall or a chapel. It was a private estate, owned by the syndicate. High walls, surrounding a garden filled with white lights and shadows. Emma walked between rows of men who didn't smile, who watched her with the same expression soldiers might use to watch a ceremony they couldn't interfere with. When she saw Richard standing at the end of the aisle, everything inside her stopped. He wore a black suit that matched his controlled presence, his expression unreadable. But his eyes locked on her with a weight that made her breath stumble. Everyone else vanished from her focus. His gaze held her as if the two of them stood alone in a world too loud to understand. The ceremony was brief, spoken under soft lights and colder silence. Richard did not take her hand. He waited until she placed it in his, on her own. His touch was warm, steady, unshakably calm. She expected pressure, but found restraint. She expected possession, but found a strange, deliberate gentleness that confused her more than cruelty ever could. When the vows were spoken, Richard's voice didn't waver. When the rings were exchanged, his fingers brushed hers with a touch too careful for a man with his reputation. And when the officiant announced them, bound, his eyes never left her, not for a second. The guests dispersed quickly, leaving the sound of distant footsteps and hushed whispers behind. Richard stepped closer, lowering his voice, so only she could hear. From this moment, On no one dictates your fate but me. Emma didn't know if that was protection or a deeper kind of cage. She only knew she was now the wife of the most feared man in the city. And the night waiting ahead of her felt like the edge of a storm she didn't know how to survive. Emma followed Richard through the long marble hallway of his mansion, her pulse racing with every quiet step she took. The doors were tall, the ceilings high, the shadows deep. Every corner held a sense of danger, like the walls themselves remembered the secrets of the men who lived here. Guards stood at certain points, silent statues watching her with unreadable expressions as she passed. She tried to keep her breathing steady, but fear pressed against her ribs with every heartbeat. Richard walked a few steps ahead of her, calm, and controlled his movements, too precise for a man who owned a world built on violence. When they reached a pair of dark wooden doors, he paused, resting his hand briefly on the brass handle before pushing them open. "This is your room," he said, his voice low. Emma stepped inside, expecting something cold and harsh. Instead, she found a space that felt strangely warm, a soft rug stretched across the floor, cream-colored curtains framed tall windows, and the air smelled faintly of lavender. It didn't feel like part of a Mafia mansion. It felt like a safe place, a place someone had prepared with intention. She turned slowly, trying to understand why a man like him would offer this. Richard watched her quietly, leaning against the doorframe. He didn't move closer. He didn't speak right away. He gave her the space to absorb the room, the silence, the meaning behind his choice. She forced her voice to work. "I thought we would share a room." Richard shook his head. "Not unless you want that." Her heart stumbled. She had heard stories about men like him, ruthless men, men who took what they wanted without asking. But he wasn't touching her, he wasn't demanding, he wasn't even stepping near her. "This isn't what I expected," she whispered. Richard stepped forward only enough so she could see his expression clearly. "I know what men in my world do," he said. "And I know what you must fear right now. But hear this, Emma. I will never touch you without your permission. Not tonight, not ever." Her eyes widened with disbelief. "Why?" Richard held her gaze for a long moment. "Because you are not a debt. And you are not a possession. You are a person under my protection, until you choose to be something else." His words didn't fix her fear, but they shifted something inside it, turning the terror into a confusing pull. She couldn't explain. Richard stepped back toward the door before she could answer. "You don't owe me anything tonight," he said quietly. "You owe me nothing at all. Get some rest. I will have someone bring dinner if you want it." He left without another word, closing the door gently behind him. Emma stood alone in the soft light of the room, her breath trembling as the truth settled. The night she feared most had come and gone. And the Mafia king she married had done the one thing she never imagined. He walked away and left her untouched. That frightened her more than anything else, because it meant he wasn't just dangerous in power. He was dangerous in the way he could be gentle too. Emma woke the next morning to soft sunlight slipping through the curtains, and for a moment she forgot where she was. The room felt too warm, too gentle, too quiet to belong to a man like Richard Hale. But then the memories rushed back, the wedding, the vows, the promise he made before walking away. She sat up slowly, her chest tightening with confusion. Why would a man feared by everyone show restraint no one expected from him? A soft knock sounded at the door. She froze. A woman entered carrying a tray of breakfast. She was older, her expression kind in a way Emma hadn't seen since her parents' passing. "Mr. Hale asked me to bring this for you. If you need anything, you can call for me. My name is Mara." The words were polite, but her eyes held something else, something like pity mixed with respect. Emma ate little but thanked Mara before exploring the room again. Then curiosity pulled her to the hallway outside her door. The atmosphere shifted back to cold steel. Guards in black suits nodded at her without expression. She walked slowly down the corridor, feeling eyes on her from every direction. It was terrifying, but oddly careful, as though every guard had been instructed to watch, but not intimidate. She reached a large window overlooking the courtyard. The mansion grounds were enormous, stretching farther than she imagined, men trained below, moving with precise, dangerous discipline. She realized this home wasn't a mansion, it was a fortress. As she wandered deeper, Emma found a door slightly open. She shouldn't look, but something pulled her toward it. Voices murmured inside, low, sharp, tense. She recognized Richard's voice, calm, but edged with authority. She is not to be approached unless I give the order. A second voice answered, if the others find out you brought her here without claiming her, they will question your leadership. Richard's reply was colder than ice. Let them question me. They won't live long enough to repeat the mistake. Emma's breath caught. She stepped back, her pulse pounding. But the floor creaked softly. Richard's voice stopped. She heard footsteps approaching faster than she could hide. The door swung open, and Richard's silhouette filled the frame, dark and unreadable. He looked at her, then at the guards behind her, then back at her. His tone shifted into something controlled. Emma, come with me. He led her through another hallway into a quiet study away from the ears of his men. He closed the door gently, not angrily. He watched her for a long moment. You aren't safe wandering this house alone. She swallowed. Am I in danger? Richard stepped closer, only a breath away. His voice softened. Danger exists for everyone in this world, but you are under my protection, and that makes you a target to the wrong people. Emma's heart pounded. Then why bring me here at all? His jaw tightened. For the first time, she saw something raw in his eyes. There are reasons you don't yet know, reasons I can't explain until I am sure you are safe. The room felt too tight, too charged. She whispered, is this because of the debt? Richard looked at her with a truth she wasn't ready for. This has nothing to do with a debt, Emma. Someone else wants you, and I am the only one standing between you and a fate much worse than me. Emma felt the world drop beneath her feet. Someone wanted her. And Richard Hale wasn't her captor. He was her shield in a war she never knew she was part of. Storm arrived without warning late in the evening when the sky turned black, and the wind howled as if the world itself was trying to warn her. Thunder shook the mansion windows, lightning flashed against the marble floors, and the rain fell in violent sheets that made the entire estate feel trapped under a trembling sky. Emma stood in her room, staring at the storm, unable to shake the words Richard had spoken. Someone else wants you. She didn't know who, but the fear of it wrapped around her like cold fingers. The lights flickered once, then again, and finally everything went dark. The mansion fell silent, except for the storm, and the sudden distant sound of hurried footsteps. Guards moved through the hallways, their radios crackling with urgent whispers. The darkness made the house feel 10 times bigger, 10 times more dangerous. Emma hugged her arms around herself, trying not to panic. Then her door opened. Emma, it's me, Richard said, his voice steady. Even in the darkness, come with me. She followed him down the hallway, lit only by the occasional flash of lightning. His presence felt different tonight, heavier, more protective. They reached a study lit by the soft glow of a single lantern. Richard shut the door behind them, keeping his body between her and anything outside. Sit, he said gently. She sat on the sofa, watching him pace like a man calculating a war. What's happening? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Someone cut the power to the estate. He replied, the backup generator failed on the same night. It isn't a coincidence. Emma's breath caught. So someone is coming here. His jaw tightened. They are testing the security. Someone wants to know how fast we respond. She shivered. The storm rattled the windows. Again, Richard crossed the room and placed a blanket over her shoulders. The gesture was small, but carried a strength she didn't know she needed. It surprised her how gentle he could be, how careful, how unlike the monster the world believed him to be. You don't have to be afraid, he said quietly. I won't let anything happen to you. Emma looked up at him, really looked, and for the first time she saw something vulnerable behind his controlled exterior. There was worry in his eyes, not for the house or the threat, but for her. That realization made her heart stutter. A loud crack of thunder made her jump. Richard sat beside her, not touching her, yet somehow surrounding her with his presence. Are you cold? A little, she whispered. He hesitated for a moment, then spoke. Come here, you're shaking. She moved closer, almost without meaning, till he wrapped his arm around her, pulling her into the warmth of his chest. His heartbeat was steady, strong, grounding. Her cheek rested against him. And for the first time since her parents' death, she felt something she had forgotten how to feel. Safe. Lightning flashed, illuminating his face for a second. Their eyes met in the dim light, and the air between them shifted slowly, gently, dangerously. Emma whispered, why are you doing all this? Why protect me this much? Richard brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch barely there. You think you were forced into my world, But you don't know the full truth, Emma. There is something about you that someone powerful wants. And until I know why, until I know how to stop him, you stay by my side." She swallowed. "Who is he?" Richard's eyes darkened with a truth he wasn't ready to reveal, not tonight. Thunder rolled across the sky again, and Emma leaned into him without thinking. He held her closer, as if he had been waiting for that moment. What she didn't know was this. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one coming for her. And Richard Hale was the only shield standing between her and a man who would tear the world apart to claim her. The storm passed, but something inside Emma did not calm the next morning. The mansion felt different, quieter, in a way that warned her danger had not gone away, only shifted. Richard left early, giving orders to his men, in a voice low enough that she could not hear the words, but sharp enough that she felt the tension from across the hall. When he returned hours later, something in his expression had changed. His control was still there, but beneath it, she sensed a crack, a pressure pushing against him. He found her sitting in the garden room, tracing patterns on the fogged window. He watched her for a moment before stepping inside. "You should not wander alone," he said gently. "This house holds eyes that belong to me and eyes that do not." Emma looked up, confusion tightening her chest. "Why do I feel like everyone here is waiting for something?" Richard studied her face. "You are beginning to see the truth, and that worries me more than anything." He approached slowly, as if afraid of frightening her, even though he was the most feared man alive. When he reached her, he lifted her chin with the softest touch she had ever felt. "Emma, someone is trying to pull you out of my protection, and if they succeed, you will not survive what they plan." Her breath trembled. "Why me?" Richard hesitated, then answered, "Because of who you are, though you do not yet know what that means." Before she could speak, a guard burst into the doorway. "Sir, we found something in the west corridor." Richard's expression darkened. "Stay here," he told her, but Emma stood too quickly. "I want to know." He didn't like it, but he let her follow. The west corridor was colder, the air heavy, with something she couldn't name. The guards parted, revealing a thin envelope lying on the floor in front of her bedroom door. Richard picked it up, his jaw clenching. When he saw the seal, Emma recognized it, too, a symbol she had seen once carved into her uncle's study desk, a symbol tied to her family's past. Richard opened the letter, his eyes sharpened with fury. The message was short, written in ink that bled across the page. "She belongs to me." Emma's heart dropped. Who wrote that? Richard crushed the letter in his fist. "Someone who should have died years ago, someone who wants to finish what he started." His voice held something new, fear for her. He turned to her, his tone low. "Emma, you are not safe here or anywhere. Unless you stay at my side from this moment, you do not leave my sight." She felt the world tilt under her feet, but the truth was clear. Whoever wanted her was getting closer, and Richard Hale was running out of time to stop him. Emma didn't sleep that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the words from the letter carved into her mind. "She belongs to me." The message felt like a hand reaching out of the dark, pulling her closer to something she did not understand, something older, stronger, and far more personal than any debt. Her hands shook as she sat in the corner of her room, knees pulled to her chest, listening to every sound in the hallway. Near dawn, the door opened softly. Richard stepped inside without knocking, his expression tense, his shirt sleeves rolled up as if he had been fighting battles she could not see. He looked at her sitting on the floor, and something in his face broke a little. "You should be asleep, Emma." "I can't," she whispered, "not when someone out there wants me." Richard crossed the room and sank down beside her, leaning his back against the wall inches from her, but careful not to touch. Her voice trembled. "Who is he? Why does he want me?" Richard exhaled, slowly choosing his words with care. "The man who wrote that is named Alastair Kane. He once controlled half the underworld, until he declared war against me. He should have died, but someone hid him, someone powerful. He disappeared for years. Then your parents died, and suddenly he resurfaced." Emma's heart froze. "My parents?" She stared at him. "Are you saying their accident?" Richard's silence was the only answer she needed. She covered her mouth, shaking as the truth crashed into her. Kane didn't want money, he didn't want revenge, he wanted her. And her parents died trying to protect her from a monster she had never even met. Richard's voice cut through the storm of fear. "Emma, listen to me. I brought you here not for the debt, but because I found out Kane was looking for you. If he took you, you would never be seen again. I married you because the only way to put you under the Hale Syndicate's protection was to make you my wife." She stared at him, her tears burning her skin. "You saved me before I even knew I needed saving." Richard finally looked at her, his eyes dark and raw. "I couldn't let another innocent die because of him. I couldn't repeat my brother's fate." The air between them tightened, her pain, her fear, his guilt, his protection, all tangled into something powerful, something she didn't know whether to fear or trust. A sudden explosion of shouts echoed from outside. The room guards yelled, footsteps rushed, weapons clicked. Richard stood instantly, pulling Emma behind him. "Stay close." "What is happening?" she whispered. Richard's voice lowered to a deadly calm. "Kane's men found the estate." The door rattled with the impact of something heavy. The guards outside shouted warnings. Richard moved Emma behind a shielded wall before turning back to her, his eyes fierce. "If they reach this room, don't run to anyone who says they are here for you. You run only to me, only me. Do you understand?" Her voice cracked. "Yes." Richard cupped the back of her head for a brief, intense moment, his forehead almost touching hers. Then he turned toward the danger with the calm of a man who had survived hell before. Emma could feel it in her bones. The war that destroyed her family had finally reached her door. And this time, she wasn't losing without a fight. Chaos swallowed the mansion faster than Emma could breathe. The air shook with gunfire, shouts, and the crashing of bodies against walls. Richard's men moved like shadows. Outside the room, their voices sharp. As they shouted orders, Emma stayed, pressed against the shielded wall, her heart racing so fast she felt lightheaded. Every second stretched into something unbearable, every sound a reminder that someone out there wanted to steal her life. The door shook under a heavy hit. Emma flinched. She could hear footsteps thudding closer, heavy, deliberate. She pressed her hands against her ears, but it did nothing to drown out the truth. Someone was coming, someone meant for her. Then Richard burst back into the room, his breathing controlled, but his eyes burning with violence. He crossed to her, pulling her up onto her feet. "We have to move now," his voice low, but urgent. They breached the west entrance. She grabbed his arm, fear shaking her voice. "Are they here for me?" Richard cupped her face, forcing her to meet his eyes. "They don't get you, not while I live. Do you understand?" She nodded, though her legs trembled. He took her hand and pulled her through a hidden door behind the study bookshelves. A narrow tunnel stretched ahead, dimly lit, and cold Emma followed close behind, the sound of fighting echoing faintly through the walls. As they reached the end of the tunnel, a figure stepped from the shadows. Emma froze, her breath stopped, her skin went ice cold. Alistair Kane. He was tall, dressed in dark clothes, his face thin, his smile sharp, and cutting. His eyes locked onto Emma with a hunger that felt worse than death. She felt herself shrink back behind Richard instinctively. Kane's voice dripped with satisfaction. "Finally," he whispered, "you look just like your mother did." Emma felt the world tilt. The ground seemed to disappear beneath her. Kane continued, his voice calm, as if speaking of flowers, not murder. "She begged me to spare her." He tilted his head, a sick smile growing. "But I only wanted the girl." Richard pushed Emma behind him, fully now, his voice a quiet growl. "You go near her, and you die here tonight." Kane laughed, a cold, vicious sound. "You stole what was mine, Hale. And all this time hiding her behind marriage papers. How noble, how pathetic." Emma couldn't speak. Fear strangled her, but anger rose too, pushing through the terror. Richard stood firm, his body a shield, entirely blocking Kane's view of her. "You harmed her family," Richard said, "and you won't touch her, you won't speak her name, and you won't leave this place alive." Kane lifted a gun with a smirk, but Richard moved first. A blur of motion, the shot echoed through the tunnel. Emma screamed, covering her ears. Richard struck Kane hard, knocking him to the ground. The gun slid away. Kane lunged, but Richard pinned him with rage Emma had never seen in anyone. Then silence. Richard stood over Kane, his chest rising with controlled fury. He glanced back at Emma, making sure she was unhurt. Kane spat blood, laughing breathlessly. "You think she is safe, you think she belongs to you, you fool. She was born for this world. She is tied to a legacy darker than you can imagine." Richard didn't let him speak again. He ended it quickly, decisively. Then he turned to Emma, his expression softer but still shaken. Emma collapsed into his arms, the fear breaking into sobs. Richard held her fiercely, his voice trembling against her hair. "It's over, you're safe now. I promised you, and I keep my promises." Emma clutched him, her tears soaking his shirt. For the first time, she understood the truth. He hadn't just protected her. He had saved her again and again, long before she ever knew he existed. And in that dark tunnel under the ruins of chaos, she realized something else. She didn't fear him anymore. She feared losing him. The world outside the tunnel was quiet in a way Emma had never known. The wind brushed over her bruised face like a soft apology, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she did not feel hunted. She felt alive. Richard kept one hand around her waist as he led her through the shadows, his body steady and warm, acting as both shield and anchor. His suit was torn, his knuckles bruised, but his eyes held a fire that would not dim. "You are safe now," he said gently, and it was the first time those words felt true. Emma looked back at the darkness behind them. Kane was gone. The threat that had cornered her life for weeks had ended in the smoke of that abandoned tunnel. A shiver ran through her as her knees weakened, but Richard caught her before she fell. "I thought you would leave me there," she whispered, her voice trembling with everything she had held inside. "I would burn down the whole world before I let anything take you," he answered. They moved toward his car parked beneath the flickering street light. The first touch of dawn painted the sky with muted red, like the world itself was waking from a nightmare. When she stepped inside the warm leather seat, she felt her heart steady for the first time in months. As the engine hummed, she looked at him, truly looked. This man who should have been cold, dangerous, heartless. This man who controlled empires through fear. This man who had risked everything for her. "Why did you do it?" she asked softly. "Why save me? Why fight for me?" His jaw tightened, and his eyes found hers with a depth that stole her breath. "Because I could not lose you," he said. "Not after everything. Not after you showed me I was still human." The car rolled forward, the city slowly coming alive around them. Emma leaned her head against the window, watching the street lights blur into soft lines. For the first time since her parents' death, she felt a strange quiet inside her chest. Not emptiness, peace. Richard reached across the console, his fingers brushing hers. She let her hand rest in his. The darkness was behind them. The danger was over. And the girl who had been sold to survive had walked out stronger than anyone had ever expected. Emma closed her eyes and breathed.